Surrealist Study Group started with the intention of opening up space for non-academic ideas and non-academic studies that have not been brought up to the attention of either my generation or younger generations or older generations. We are an intergenerational group of people. Primarily, we work in rotation with authors and artists, but we compare a visual artist with an author on a regular basis as a way to also find common threads. As a librarian here at the PRS Library, we focus on studies of esoteric practices. So this is the largest collection of esoteric books in the United States. It's comparable to Ritman in the Netherlands. So it's an incredible collection in a library and full of resources for anyone who wants to seek other types of information on philosophy, arts and sciences, medicine, metaphysics, biographies. We have upstairs books on dreams, books on consciousness. We have an entire section on astrology, theosophy, comparative religion, Christianity, witchcraft. We can find anything from secret societies here to cults and the light and the dark side of humanity. So this is kind of embodying everything that we know as far as how humans have perceived spirituality and how we engage with spirituality and also how we engage with consciousness. And the fact that we're bringing a conversation here today about the internet is something I've wanted for a while to discuss this in groups, because we are living in a really particular time in human years where technology is always between communication, is always between us. There's always a screen in front of you to talk to somebody, even if it's on the phone. It's our way to reach out. It's our way to create spaces also, but it's also what kind of spaces are we creating? And how are we discussing these advancements without the fact that the machine also has a lot of control over how we think and how we perceive life? So I'm very honored to bring today to this the library. Where's Joanne? Joanne. And just to read a little bit about, she's going to give you a presentation, a little short introduction to her project, and then we'll go into a Q&A and open up to the floor to chat. So everyone, prepare your questions if you have them. And Joanne is the author of Wrong Way, which is her latest. It was published in 2023. And Lurking, How a Person Became a User, was published in 2020 during the pandemic. She was the inaugural winner of Carl and Marilyn Thomas Art Foundation's Arts Writing Award for an Emerging Writer. And she has been a resident at IBEAM, a Logan Nonfiction Program Fellow, and recipient of the Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant, and an instructor at the School of Poetic Computation. She has contributed to The Nation, The Guardian, The New York Times, Technology Review, and Dissent magazine. She currently writes a column called Speculations for Filmmaker magazine. So I want to welcome Joanne. Please join us, and I'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dama and the Surrealist Study Group, and to the Philosophical Research Society for inviting me. It's really easily the most beautiful and coolest venue I've ever given a talk in. And I was inspired, one of the first screenings I saw here at the Philosophical Research Society was something that Dama organized, it was a screening of Testament of Orpheus. And there was this really lovely crowd, and a lot of them looked extremely young. And I really loved seeing these probably teenage kids showing up for a cocktail screening. It just felt like the coolest thing you could do on a Friday night. And if you know this film, there are a lot of impressive cameos. So at one point, Picasso shows up. And when it happened, I heard right behind me a group of, again, they look teenage to me. I'm assuming they were teenagers, and they were gasping. They whispered and they gasped together, it's Picasso. And it just like warmed my heart in this way that I like, that they had this place to go, they had this community together, that they're hanging out. And it was also, it made me think about the enthusiasm I had for culture at that age and the places that I was going to express that enthusiasm. So, you know, if we take a trip back, we're talking about what comes after social media, but I want to talk first about what came before. And social media as like a coinage kind of started happening in the aughts. So there are people now who are retroactively using the word social media to be applied to this stuff, but I would say, no, let's have a segmented time of like 2002 to 2022, and I'll get to why those dates. But so here's what came before social media. We had this noisy contraption, a modem, and I knew very well. I would log in through AOL, which was the ISP that I had in high school, to connect to the internet, and it kind of looked like this. So AOL launched in 1991, and that's the same year that the World Wide Web opened to the public. Now, if you look at this directory, what looks like a browser to you? Like, do you see how you'd get to the actual World Wide Web? This would have been like, I don't know, 1995-ish was that directory. It's a little bit confusing, isn't it? Like, I at first I was like, oh, was computing it? And then, I mean, I've looked at the slide quite a bit, and I'm like, oh, wait, there's the internet connection, like right in that right row, up 3. And, you know, that's where you'd find the browser or a Usenet reader. But it was really, at that time, in the 90s, you were connecting to these other things, education, entertainment, kids only. I definitely, as a teenager, did not hang out in the kids only zone. And this is what the infamous chat rooms looked like. So there were 7 million subscribers in 1996, 25 million subscribers in the year 2000. And those were pretty outrageous numbers considering that the World Wide Web, which, you know, is kind of what we're using as the internet today, only launched in 91. The internet and online connectivity before the 90s was pretty niche, and this was popularizing getting online in the first place. This is where I would hang out. This screenshot I found at like some random page for like hacking AOL, and I imagine it wasn't that hard to hack, but like I definitely hung out all the time on the Spin magazine message boards. That's where I would hang out with other teenagers and talk about music and film, and I'm sure we were talking about Cocteau, actually. Like, that feels like someone I would have been enthusiastic about. This is my book where I talk a lot about AOL and other things. As Dama mentioned, it came out in the pandemic, which is why most people haven't heard of it. But one of the kind of annoying things of many of releasing this book in 2020 is that every interview I did was, people would say something like, now that we're all online, are we all users? And I had to like go with this framework of like, we have this internet to connect to, and is it good or is it bad? And it was just like a really frustrating framework, because I felt like this book that I worked on for quite some time, it had been like an accumulation of ideas that I felt like this great urgency to get out, because I knew the scope of the project was going to be impossible even a year later. Like, I felt like the whole idea of talking about social media and like the online communities, generation by generation from like the 90s onward, it was just going to collapse into something too huge and insurmountable. And this was an ending to something that I didn't quite know yet, but I definitely pointed out, like there was a lot in the book actually about user behavior as generative AI training data, and I didn't really have the coinage then in 2020, but that's what I covered quite a bit. But I also, I mean, like I mentioned before, AOL was launched the same year that the World Wide Web was open to the public. So the web is 35-ish years old, proposed in 1989, launched in 1990, and opened to the public in 1991. I would say that the way that AOL populated the internet with users, it mainstreamed online activity. The web populated the internet with content, and that's Tim Berners-Lee right here. He created the web. It's still non-commercial. It's still decentralized. Anyone with an internet connection and a web browser can visit a website, and that's always been true. Here's what websites used to look like. That's what Amazon used to look like. There's never been a Bezos or a Zuckerberg or an Elon Musk CEO of the web, and that's like a really powerful thing to think about because Amazon.com is a website, and there's no boss level above the .coms. Like, there are nonprofits, there are consortiums through universities that get together and propose standards, and everybody has to, like, it's voluntary, but it's voluntary to the extent that you can't really operate a website without adhering to these standards. So the protocols and the standards that are maintained by the World Wide Web, various nonprofits and organizations, like, that's this resource that we've all kind of taken for granted. And here's like another website from the YOR. There were 23,500 websites in 1995, and by 1988 there were 2 million. And I don't know how many there are now, but the Internet Archive just reported that they archived their trillionth website, which I can't even wrap my head around, like a trillion websites being archived. It's crazy. So this is, the web, I would argue, is one of the many reasons why we aren't on AOL anymore. Like, AOL had a lot of different failures that happened at about the same time. Like, its advertisers were largely the .coms that went bust. There was this Time Warner merger that was a big mess. But also, the web was non-commercial and interoperable. If you could connect to people who had CompuServe ISPs or Prodigy ISPs, just all on this web because it was built in a way that was interoperable. And even like, I noticed, when I was reporting something, I found this note from Playbill that announced that it closed its AOL channel in 1997 because they were so annoyed with maintaining separate forums from CompuServe to AOL and like Prodigy, and then they're just like, we're just gonna have a website. And I think a lot of different organizations that had set up portals within AOL and set them up within Prodigy realized these online communities are collapsing, and it's collapsing in favor of this web. So I think, if we think about again, like what a website even is, these are just like websites. Yes, there are other things. There are like web apps. You could argue they're more like web apps and content that we were used to, but the way you get there is with a web browser, the same way you would have 30 years ago. You just put a URL in and you get to this website. Social media, when it kind of picked up, as I would say it's like 2002-ish, this was like, it was called Web 2.0 because it was the migration of online communities from whether that was BBS, forums, Prodigy, AOL, to the web, as in like websites. And what that looks like is something like this, a Facebook page that's a website. And it was the static webzine design that had been the most typical way of creating a website in the 90s moved toward these like more interactive kind of communities. And in a way, like in the case of Facebook, an AOL-styled walled garden that, while at the same time exists as a website. So here's kind of like another website that is it's still in existence. Weirdly, it's like corporations don't actually die, but no one really uses it but bots. So there are like new internet empires that were created in this era. Social networks like Facebook, streaming services like YouTube, which is inside Google Alphabet, but they are still websites. And there was a new way of accumulating capital in the sense of like, instead of paywalls or subscription fees, they were the strings attached were tracking applications like cookies and scripts that harvest personal data and monitor user activity across the web. And then, of course, like another big breakthrough is 2007, the iPhone launches. And these social media sites migrate again. Well, they migrate, but they also, I guess that's not the right word. It's like they have a website still, and they also have apps, social media apps. So this would be things like Twitter, Instagram, Foursquare. I actually forgot what that icon was, and it took me a moment to remember what that was, but that was Foursquare. And it meant like now the opportunity for like 24/7 data capture of users. And another thing that shifted around this era as people are moving, well, like again, having their life on the screen, multiple screens, the demographics of online life shifted where all of a sudden you couldn't just say being an online user was a youth thing. It's like an everything thing. It's a global thing. I mean, in 2016, 42% of American seniors use smartphones, which was 4 times as many as 5 years prior. So it's just like it all of a sudden where if AOL was this moment of getting kind of these youth or young-ish people onto the internet, there was just like this moment with Facebook and all these other social media sites, because it became almost like a necessary thing if you wanted updates from your kid's school about like if school is like snowed in or something like that, you had to be on Facebook to get it. It became compulsory as like internet use became compulsory. And now we have this other big shift, which I mean is pretty annoying to illustrate, and that's Sophia the robot, if anyone remembers. The launch of ChatGPT in November of 2022. And I think we're finally having this conversation now of, is social media dying? And I pretty firmly believe yes. We have some data right here, this is from the Financial Times, that shows like their social media activity peaked in 2022. And I think that data is pretty relevant here because that's when a lot of people are, well, like most of us were still kind of isolated in COVID quarantine. So that conversation about online life as this only reliable way to have a social life, that's part of this spike, in addition to work that had migrated to Zoom calls as opposed to work from home activity. And we also see this shift, even the people like Mark Zuckerberg are admitting it, that the activity that was taking place viewable by public social media accounts has moved to private messages between users. One thing I really want to point out here that is pretty critical to understand is that like messaging as an email, you can email someone with like a university account if you have a Gmail account. The reason that happens is because email itself is like, the protocols are decentralized and again, non-commercial. But messaging apps, when we're talking about these apps, things like WhatsApp, Telegram, you can't send a Telegram message to a WhatsApp account because there's become this like enclosure of much of what had been open and non-commercial. So the way that the web, while being open, non-commercial, decentralized, there's been this enclosure by companies like Facebook. The same thing's kind of happening with messaging, but and then that's leading to other kind of possible reasons why I think there's like a general fatigue. One is feeling exploited. If your user data is creating value for someone else, even as like pennies, fractions of pennies, for companies like OpenAI, because it's being scraped for content for LLMs, the whole aspect of hanging out no longer feels fun or freeing or liberating. It feels like work. It's even if you're only generating fractions of pennies, you're still generating value for somebody else. And then you also have like the hangover from pandemic times online activity. It was overkill. I think there's like the sense of the internet as a whole feels like a space of work. the fracturing of platforms and lack of trust in platforms, that big tech could become this. It was galvanizing in 2016 to speak out against these corporations in Silicon Valley, but it went nowhere, and it's been almost 10 years, and we really don't have any policy solutions, any major policy solutions that we can point to as resolving or being beneficial in any way, despite this like great animosity toward these companies and the CEOs and the billionaires that run them. And then just the unreliability that a space as large and popular as Twitter could just completely be disintegrated and rebranded as X. Like, it shows that even these seemingly invincible companies are still themselves fragile. And I saw this tweet on X, because every once in a while I do go on there, and I thought this was like kind of expressing the sentiment that a lot of people are feeling right now, which is, I'm going to read it in case anyone can't see. It's just I don't know who this person is, but I thought it was a very insightful comment. I stopped taking social media too serious when I was talking daily in a group chat for 6 years with 30 people, and one of our friends passed away, and only 3 of us showed up. And I just think about that constantly, not gonna lie, it's low-key haunting. I'm guessing like she's meaning that only 3 people actually showed up to the funeral, and it's just like one of those things that really made me evaluate, like, yeah, I was in like a ton of group chats in 2020, and I can't even remember some of these people now. It was just this weird like wash of activity, and where the internet in the 90s had been this kind of dreamlike portal from reality. But then all of a sudden, when I think about it now, it feels like work, as in personal brand management, networking, shallow interactions, vast acquaintanceship, and something that I feel like I need to escape to. And as it happens, there is a reality that I can escape from the internet and be part of. So that's kind of bringing me to the topic of the discussion now, what comes next. I don't think online community will go away, but the platform-style aggregation of users as data mining for ads or trading data, people have had it with that. And I would propose again that maybe we do need to look backward to go forward. We need digital communication tools that are built like the web and email, decentralized, non-commercial. The ownership model of corporate social media is designed for plunder of users as an emotional, intellectual, spiritual, like just the lives being this this raw material for generative AI. But there are alternatives. One is ActivityPub, which is Mastodon in the Fediverse. That's one example. It is non-commercial and decentralized, and it was developed within the W3C nonprofit that Tim Berners-Lee founded. I mean, but I want to go back to the web. Another reason here, the web is so powerful that OpenAI wants a piece of it right now, and they just announced this browser, Atlas. It's built on Chromium, which is like the open source browsing that Google has, like, and it shows to me as like the web is still so relevant and powerful that OpenAI even has to gesture toward wanting a piece of it and putting forth this browser, which I don't think anyone's actually going to use, because it's just like it's using all content on the web as like this data layer for its generative AI tools. And again, like, if the web was one of the pieces that killed AOL 20 years ago, I think the web could be today something that is one of those elements that leads to the not necessarily death, but maybe further erosion of services like Facebook or YouTube. It is certainly more robust. It is certainly what these companies are dependent on. And thank you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. I think the first time we met at Joanne, we were talking about raising children today, and like how I'm having personally trouble like finding a school for my 4-year-old without screens, and that's a problem. Like, I feel like there's now, it's so embedded in the communication, and spaces are so embedded in between the screen, the screen between us, between our relationships, that is, even 4-year-olds now require the use of screen to learn. And I think I remember, I don't know if you remember what you said, but I think it led to me consider my own consciousness as like a user in front of my child, and like how I'm learning from it too. And and it gets kind of meta here, but I will, as I was thinking about this and asking some questions to you, and I'm going to ask a few questions, but I also want the room to feel free to jump in. We're not a super formal Q&A situation here, so please jump in at any point in the conversation. I'm going to let you take the reign from time to time. But this quote came to mind, and because it speaks to consciousness and our use of online platforms, and how, and you talk about this in your book, Lurking, how we feed information into it. It only knows as much as we let them know. And AI is the same, right? We're now feeding AI with questions, with information. In your book, one of your chapters on Wikipedia also really struck me. It's like how also, as a student of life and as a student of the internet, as a user, Wikipedia is, for a librarian and for an artist, is one of the things you go to for like to research any information, but how biased it is based on who's editing. And women are usually left out of it big time. And the statistics show that. So this quote is by Manly Hall, and it was written in 1945, in October of 1945. It was a lecture, and this is a transcription of a lecture that he gave here at PRS. He is the founder of PRS. And he speaks to the mirror of the mind and our consciousness. So we do not know what consciousness is. We do not know what the power is within ourselves that makes us know ourselves. We do not know the root of our own being, the substance of our own existence. We only know that we are strange instruments, very much like delicate machines, and that through these machines, there flows out into life, into the world, into our environment, a confusion of impulses, noble and ignoble, constructive and destructive, long-visioned and short-visioned. And from this strange oracular fabric of our beings, there are constantly flowing out oracles, ideals, dreams, purposes, hopes, structures for the future. And each person in his own small way is trying to live out some small dream which hovers in the intangibles of life. And I want to ask you about like how, in context of this quote, and writing Lurking, how do you feel about how we are creating space today in order to learn more about ourselves in our human time?
Well, I think this might sound very obvious, but sometimes the necessary things to think about are pretty obvious, but we're gathering in person here, and that's definitely a luxury. It's something that I feel lucky enough to be able to afford to live in a city like Los Angeles, where there would be enough interested people to gather in this room and have this conversation here. That's something that maybe a time before you could take for granted because cities weren't as expensive as they are now. But I think about it too, what you were saying about wanting to find a school for your child that offers screen-free education. I mean, all of these billionaires send their kids to those kind of schools. All of those billionaires they have chauffeurs. They are not in Waymos. So it's important to think about this because like this technology that's being offered as some kind of solution, it's not good enough for the people who can have everything, who are perhaps at the top of the CEOs and executives of these companies. it's not good enough for them. It's more just good enough for the general public. And I think that's always something to keep in mind, that these are technologies that fail. They fail regularly, and they're failing people who don't have the clout, the capital, the political capital to fight back necessarily. And I'm sorry, I guess that's...
No, yeah, and there's, during the pandemic, to go back to how we became, the addiction expanded. There was just beyond any comprehension what was going on, but there was no way to communicate without it, right? So, and there was no way to learn without it. Students were put in front of computers in classrooms, and some would turn off their faces, and I feel like that connection to the internet during that time and being a user was for children, especially teenagers. Today we're seeing the consequences of it and the results and the impact in their consciousness and their sense of perception.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think one thing that's major is like this erosion of a home as a domestic space that's private to you and the people you invite in. And this has been happening over time where, you know, it's through Instagram, you want to show that you have a nice apartment or something, so you're sharing it with friends, but like this sense that like a house could be this private space and no one can see if you've got dust on the bookshelf or not. This erosion of private spaces in general, I would say like the home in particular is one I think about, because like why should your job have any idea what your house looks like? It's again, like it's a really simple observation, but at the same time it's something that like there was this tension of like, oh, you have this freedom of working from home and not needing to go into the office, but at the same time that means the office becomes your living room as well, and it's collapsing a lot of spaces that perhaps for an individual who has the opportunity to would be better served by having these elements of their life separate.
Would anyone like to ask any questions at this time? We're okay? Yeah? I guess with a question like that, I'd have to break down what we're counting as social media or not. And for the purpose of keeping this talk short, I kind of zeroed in on the idea of platform-based social media. So that would be Facebook, Instagram. YouTube would be kind of a fuzzy thing because people do go on YouTube and watch like full-length movies. Video games that are like interactive. These are all like social experiences. But I think this like platform way of putting a post up, going viral or not, the benefits are not, people aren't getting the benefits that they might have before. And one of those benefits I would say is like, 2011-ish when Twitter is really hopping. One of those benefits would be like getting a job there were all these stories about people getting jobs at Facebook or Google because they networked on things like Twitter, or they became TV writers because they were witty on Twitter. I mean, there were just all these opportunities to be discovered through these platforms. And I don't think that's happening like it was before because the opportunities aren't there. The jobs, like we're seeing, was it something like 40,000 people laid off at Amazon this week? It's just like these, like the tech jobs have revealed themselves to be not a golden ticket to
stability that they might have been understood or misunderstood to be in 2012-ish. The replacement, though, I would say, like, what were people doing in 1986? I don't really know. I mean, I feel like going to, like, community theater or, like, going to the supermarket, I don't actually know. In fact, like, that's, like, that, but I have myself really pretty dramatically reduced the amount of time that I spend on the internet. And I'm not saying that my life is identical to everybody else, but I do have a privilege of not needing to be on any of these platforms for any reason right now. There's no job that's forcing me to post something to Facebook or check updates on Facebook. I really don't have to. And it's cleared a lot of unnecessary, like, mental anxiety or stress or, like, sense of stuckness that sometimes these apps kind of present. And I've had to, like, be as normie as, like, typing NewYorkTimes.com or, like, WashingtonPost.com into the browser window myself, because even the delivery of news through these platforms, because I think the way that Twitter has been has disintegrated in a very specific form where it had been for some time, I would say past, from like 2011-ish to maybe 2022-ish, a place that you could log in and get the news, and news sites counted on that traffic, counted on the possibility of stories being distributed that way. And a lot of those content sites for online journalism don't really exist anymore, that being AI having a role in that too. But this way of getting news through social media, that's kind of gone away. And the kind of conversations and social activity, that's stalled too. I mean, there are replacements like Blue Sky, but I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but like the user base of Blue Sky is nothing like what Twitter was. And what I do see is like this more micro communities through Discord servers, spaces that you have to know somebody already to know how to find them. And that has, that there are plus and minuses to that too, because like I'm thinking back, going back to like teenage me, I could go into these AOL portals and make friends without needing anything other than an interest in esoteric music and film and culture. I don't necessarily know how that works. In my book, I talk about how subreddit worked, where you'd hang out on one of the subreddits. I think it was like Girl Gamers. I can't remember the subreddit's name now, but it was like, the subreddit was something like about women in gaming. And you could just like, if you hung out on the subreddit enough and post enough, someone would eventually message you and be like, hey, we're hanging out at this Discord server, come join us here. So it's like kind of like a few little doors to like vet you before you get to like where the really good conversations are happening. So that's like one way. And I'd say like that's not really social media because it's not like out in the open for everyone to see. But
it's kind of like going back to the chat rooms a little bit, like of the early chat rooms. It's, and I Discord, as an example, and to piggyback on this a little bit, and the quote that you referenced from this user on the funeral and how community, is like the number of followers the followers and the community you have on the social media, it's not real. The amount of likes, it's not real. It's like there's this like surreal reality to our perception of like having these numbers is contextual, is like equivalent to a sense of community. And part of the conversation we have here in the study groups in person is like we don't allow research prior to coming in to learn together. And it's something that also has been refreshing to a lot of people, and like having received the information in the moment that we are talking about it. So we're all new and fresh to it. There's no prior internet research on it. So we have the books on the table and we have the discussion in the open, and it's so refreshing. It's like we're learning to unlearn how to use our own capacity to think about things without the internet feeding us any information prior to really expressing it. And that's something we're trying to build again. And I think it takes a lot. It takes time, and it takes energy, and it takes driving. Sometimes it costs. Like, this study group is free, but it's like to create spaces costs money these days too. So when the internet sometimes is like just free. So how do we find that balance? What I love about your book and Lurking, like, you kind of end your book with the idea of having a librarian organizing the use of the internet. I want you to talk about that.
Well, it came from this idea that I just kept thinking about how Amazon started with books, and it was just like, what does it mean that a company as big and with the concentration that it has for basically all merchandise, even services, cloud services, what does it mean that starts with selling books? What else started with books? I would say it's like a library is, we all think of the library first as like a place you get books, but also there are places, like a lot of the larger libraries, there are so many services on top of that. Like, you can rent a suit if you need a job interview and you don't have a suit. Like, there are things like you're loaned out so many like social services are happening through a library, but of course, like, at this incredibly cash-strapped scale versus like the book as this point of entry for Amazon, because it was like a consistent way of shipping when it launched in the 90s. And it just kept me, from that idea, I was thinking about the nature of care for information and who is doing that work, and what does it mean to be the custodian of the information we want to survive that exists online. And you can look at something like the Internet Archive, which again, like preserving 1 trillion websites is mind-boggling to me. Internet Archive also has like resources that a typical organization can't necessarily step into, but we can, as individuals, care for our own stuff. And that process of going through things is something I write a lot about in my column for Filmmaker, about like people who've really had choices with as an artist. Can you maintain an archive of your own work? I know, like, I feel personally like I'm really sloppy about maintaining my own archives. When then I talk to other artists, I'm like, okay, wait, I'm actually not that bad, because it's such a pain, and it feels like narcissistic, and it feels like ego-driven. But then you're like, no, I've made this work, and I want it to survive. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's an artist, and he had this unusual experience where he also went viral, like super viral for this, where his neighbor was a painter who did these kind of like Bridget Riley style op-ed art that was really outstanding. And he noticed his neighbor passed away, and he noticed some of the work in like ready to go to the dumpsters, and he immediately just like pulled it as much as he could, collected it. This is a neighbor he didn't really know that well, but he posted online, and he posted something, just like a sweet little comment about his neighbor. It's my friend Alan Warburton, and from there it just like went crazy viral, and there was a art exhibition of his neighbor's work. But the conversation I really loved, because I wrote a piece about it. It was like Alan was at the same time thinking about his own archives, and he was really like his mother, I think his mother like gave him some of his like drawings when he was 5 years old, and like just like had this huge like boxes and boxes of stuff, and he was really ruthless about preserving it because he's like, if this is stuff that I'm going to carry with me, like I don't want to like leave it to someone else to sort through. I need to be really dedicated about what I leave behind, because like that's the other reason that personal archives are frustrating to deal with, because it's like facing your own mortality, and just like as an artist or a writer, that's like it's a real daunting task.
It is, and it's also preserving memory. It's like I think for an artist's work to be archived, it's its own job, and it requires a lot of help. Personally speaking, I don't know how artists do it. But speaking of archive and like archiving our identity too, and like because the internet puts us into like kind of a singular identity, right? You speak about that in your book too. It's like we're all like under this umbrella, but we're all like also like alienated from the multiplicity of our humanity, really. And one thing I had, and I think we talked about this briefly, but I started a project in 2018 where I started printing all my photos from social media. I became obsessive about printing them all, because it was like, they're just gonna disappear in this cloud. I can't, and I use them now as collage elements, but they're all patterns of a certain time and space and people and conversations and relationships, and just the act of printing them and having them physically in front of me was rediscovering the portal of the internet, and what it was giving back to me, and it was this memory, and I was using my phone constantly to take photos, and it's like there is a sense of like that's the user part of me that loves this tool as a tool. It is a tool for artists too, and it's a tool for a lot of people working through asking questions to the oracle. And I speak of the internet sometimes, Google is an oracle, it's like, yes. And algorithms.
It's getting really hard to access the web yourself and seek that information, at least from my point of view and my experience, especially with like I grew up with Google as my search engine, right? You go to Google now, everything is monetized. The search is just really overwhelming. You can't really seek knowledge unless something is being paid for and put in front of you. So if web is going to erode social, in your point of view, what are some of your thoughts on how to seek that knowledge with all this monetization and money getting in the way of really, like, even setting up a website costs money where people have to find that information. How do you think that, like, what are your thoughts and opinions on that?
I want to combine both of your comments in a way, because so when you're using Google, you're behaving in a way that Google is kind of dictating for you to behave. In many ways, that might be, if you realize that maybe when you type in WashingtonPost.com, sometimes you type it too fast and you misspell it. It's just easier to like type Washington Post into Google.com and then get the first result usually being that website, and using that as kind of like a button to the website you need to go to. So that's something that like Google is encouraging. Also, what you were saying before about like, I address this in my book a little bit, where like, if you're on Facebook or if you're on Instagram or if you're on YouTube, there are behaviors that you are kind of going through. You are not just acting free and like yourself. It might feel like you're acting like yourself, but a retweet is a specific kind of branded behavior by, say, Twitter X, or like doing something like liking a post. This is a real like a behavior that it is giving you to do on that website. So it's not like this free expression of your identity. And I think that's something that people forget about these social media platforms, how much of the behavior that's become normal to us now is actually, it doesn't really make sense. You can't just like someone's comment in a face-to-face interaction. You have to like nod your head or like be present in some way. So I think that's like the two things together in my mind, like how much can change in, you know, in this case, we're talking about 25 years of Google, maybe a little bit less, but like that's over time, it's become kind of like that first step when you get to the web. And I would say like having a website isn't, I mean, everything is expensive relatively speaking, but like you can set up a website for, you know, like maybe $100. I mean, it's actually like if it's a content-based website, the thing is, how do people find it? And that's the stage that we're in this moment of transition, which is like, how do people find cool stuff on the internet? Are we really going to like discount, if the Internet Archive can archive 1 trillion websites, are we really ready to say that like nothing good is on the web? I mean, I think it's more like, how do we find the good stuff? Or how do we create the good stuff and tell people that it exists? And if we go way, way back, it's like there were books, like Yellow Pages style physical books that people would just like look through and be like, oh, cutecats.com, I'm gonna check that website out. Like this is something you'd like do in 1995 or something. Or you'd like go to Yahoo, which is another like throwback, which started out as kind of like this directory of, you know, that looked very much like that AOL directory where you'd like click on hobbies, gardening, plant zone, let me check that website out. And it's definitely a problem, but I feel like we've already reached this point of like fracture that nobody really knows where to gather, and people don't necessarily want to gather in the same place because it means like, who knows what kind of trolly, awful people. I have no idea what's going on at like Truth Social. I just like, I'm checked out. I'm happy they have their own, like not happy for them. I'm like happy that they are not in my internet space. So we don't necessarily want these like giant buckets of people all kind of crowded together. But
we also have Elon Musk now creating a Wikipedia. Yeah. I forget what he calls it, but yeah, it's how that's gonna go. I have no idea, but it's yeah. Yeah.
This line, I'm interested in this idea that there's this algorithmic corralling that they're very much guided by when they pick up, Instagram or Twitter or anything. Versus, I think what you're both speaking to is this idea of like curiosity driving. And then maybe this question is to both of you because I'm intrigued by what you said about the surrealist tools that might kind of push through the algorithmic sort of page. But I don't know, just throwing that out there as a point of discussion.
Well, there's that like when you put fucking blah blah blah, the AI on Google doesn't work. You know that trick? That's kind of a surreal trick.
That's great.
Or a fucking car. It doesn't read the cursor.
Yeah, I was one of the discussions we had on AI in the Surrealist group, which was it brings me to this question, is that we're like, how can you discern a poem, a Surrealist poem, from ChatGPT to a real a real written by a person, human being poem, because Surrealism relies on automatism and collage and bibliomancy is one of the practices, which is like kind of cutting the lines and putting them together. And like AI is a tool that uses whatever the information was put in there and like does the same thing. It's so surreal. It is in a way AI. I like to think of AI as a surrealist artist in some ways, because it's using all the information that we're providing and putting it in and like breaking it down into like here's I'm feeding you with this broken, put together kind of Frankenstein version of it. But the problem we have with the group, and something we discussed in this group, is the problem we have is the gender bias. Still, like, if you ask anything with AI and Wikipedia, it's like it comes from the same perspective that we have been taught our entire lives, which we know isn't true anymore, because women were publishing, there were philosophers, there were psychiatrists, there were psychologists, they were equally on same pattern as Carl Jung, but they were not being published as highly as Carl Jung. But we're still educating people in those terms that AI only brings up male authors to this day, unless you specifically request a female author, or specifically put a quote or like the title of the book, and not to mention women are not being translated. And the internet also is a place where, like, if you're searching in English terms, like the amount of translators, like women voices being translated to English today is less than 3% of publishing in America. So what are we searching? What are we getting from the internet? What's the point of view? That was something we kind of discussed here too. That's why we intentionally seek out, and you have to dig. It's like you have to go to the black hole of the internet to find, and sometimes you don't find anything about it. I've come in this research, in the process of teaching this class and guiding the group, is sometimes I hit a wall and it's I can't find a single paragraph about this person who I know existed, who I can find maybe books about it, maybe someone somewhere is digging the closets for it and printing it back and bringing it back to life. But it's a job. I think we all have to become a little bit of diggers and scavenge hunters and librarians in our own ways to dig that information out, because I think we're still feeding AI at its speed of light. I don't know, the speed it's going, it scares me a little bit, but we're not understanding I think for me personally, and I want to hear what you have to say too, but we don't understand the core of the issue at this point.
I would say there are two things about AI to broadly understand. Is the first is that AI, as we experience it in work applications, it makes very straightforward things abstract. So before, if you were a translator, it was very straightforward what you had to do. You had a text, you'd read it, you'd sit with the author's thoughts, translate that. Now there's this other step that maybe you have this janky translation, you have to go back to the text, and it means that being able to scope a project is impossible for a translator now, because it could be a really messy, if it's a very surrealist style book, the AI translation is going to be horrible. If it's something like a technical manual, maybe it's okay. But then at the same time, why is AI going into creative? Why is OpenAI debuting with projects like AI-generated music or art or writing? Because these are inexact. As soon as it goes into a space that you're going to die or not, they're not as confident in these results. Something like the Waymos I've written about, these are not fully automated cars. They have a lot of human help assisting these allegedly automated vehicles on the road. Something like music, you can't get an A+ on a song. You can't get an A+ on a book. These aren't things that are just universally good or bad. So that's why OpenAI debuted with all of these creative applications, because it's that inexactitude that they thrive in. And it makes us kind of doubt our own intuition about things in some ways, in the same way of it's abstracting your own connection to this material if you think it could be fake or not. And I think with the algorithms, now we can kind of see algorithmic behavior as kind of creation of prompts and creation of desire. And it's the alienated experience that I have regularly online is just that finding something that AI trying to anticipate my own desires of something and it not matching up at all. And then being in this, that's in some ways probably why I'm not using the internet as much, because I want to like maintain my own sense of like creative desires and curiosity, which is led astray by, you know, Google suggesting something for me.
I just wanted to say something about a common topic that I've been noticing on my readings and this conversation, and is how do we convey that friction is good? You know, like when we talk about, let's try harder, let's look harder, let's go around these websites. That's friction, and for decades, capitalism has sold to us that the frictionless life, or like a convenience life, or the illusion of convenience, it's the way to go, right? Like we are here on a Saturday afternoon. We care deeply about it. We can compromise our lives to do friction and to find the way information and to go around and like to make our lives harder in order to actually access the information that we actually want. How do we, and this is not a question that I think we can solve here, but I'm curious on like what ways and mechanisms we can actually sell back to the world that friction is good. To me, life is friction. Life is about what happens when there's friction on the social interaction, which is something that, to your question before about what's coming after social media, is AI. And when it's that, it's less friction, it's less having to face a person, it's less having to have uncomfortable interactions, right? So how do we convey and sell outside this room of lovely nerds what is that friction is good?
Yeah.
You know, how do we communicate that going around and being hard, like digging very hard and like don't go to ChatGPT that is giving you a question of minutes, which is what's selling and which like is what is making it so powerful. How do we get like to the actual work that is not the one person that super critical?
I love this question. I mean, and I think it, to be kind of, again, obvious, but like the most rewarding things in life are not easy. You're only rewarded by things that you put effort into. Right now, I think there's a sense that like any effort you put into internet activity is not worth it. And I don't necessarily agree with that, which is why I'd say like online life will continue in some way, online communities will in some way, and perhaps that's more fractured, perhaps that's more difficult, perhaps that unfortunately will leave some people behind who might not have access for various reasons. But it comes back to what you're saying. It's that added friction, and I think that gorging on online social platforms that we saw in the pandemic, that there would be this kind of response of people feeling alienated, and when the opportunity presented itself, people stopped using the internet as much as they were in 2022. That shows there's potential for like a similar kind of turn away from what is AI generated, and also just general frustration because so much of it does not work like it allegedly, like, yeah, some of it is impressive. Other elements of AI, I mean, I kind of have been trying to not talk much about AI because it's like, it's hard to like, it covers so much ground now, and some of it is quite impressive and some is really rusty, and the stuff that's rusty, I would say, is more like aligned with actual human care and interest, if that makes sense.
I see a hand. Yeah.
Yeah, that worries me a lot. There was a story in The Verge, I want to say like 3 years ago, about that same issue that you mentioned, about how like the sense of file storage, like where if you grew up around the time, or somewhat around the time that I did, you just kind of knew about folders and like where things are like embedded inside on a desktop as like this a sense of the desktop even itself, an analogy. And now for people who, many of them grown up online, it's that on-demand sense that you should just be able to search everything and it's just going to deliver an answer, deliver a file. Yeah, it beats me. Honestly, I'm stumped here. I don't know. I don't really know what the solution to that is, other than like digital literacy in general, which, for as online saturated as education is, it's not about things like as simple as where is your file. Like, what was that?
I said in class I call digital hygiene.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things I'm most excited for you to talk about is like enclosure. I feel like, yeah, the dichotomy you set up of like a web and a platform is really interesting to me, because I feel like one of the most exciting parts of the internet to me is hypertext. Like, I don't know, I just feel like it's very rich and sensuous and exciting and like endlessly iterative to click on hypertext and to be taken somewhere else. And I feel like that kind of is eroded by the fact that these platforms have taken away hypertext. Like, you can't click on a link in Instagram and be taken elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I guess that's something interesting to me, and I don't know, I just want to hear you talk about that.
No, it is interesting. I mean, the hostility to links within Instagram is really a warning sign. But at the same time, I feel like they're kind of they placed a bet that Facebook would be more dominant than the web. And if you go back to like the maybe 10-ish years ago, Facebook had something called like Facebook Free Basics, where they set up like a lot of free internet services, almost just like Facebook, like AOL in the global south, where they like, you could get allegedly free internet, but you were kind of just like going on Facebook. And this was just a way to like onboard loads and loads of people, especially in the global south. So there have been platforms that have demonstrated the same, where it's just like they want you to feel like there are limits to online life, and then the natural limit is within what exists on Facebook.com. But I think that, I mean, my hunch is that they're losing out on that, because everybody who spends, maybe not the first 6 months of life on the internet, but after a while you do find out what a website is, and you're going to try to figure out how to go there. But I guess like the thing I wanted to set up with this talk is like the idea that there could be enclosure on the web, and that the web has been taken for granted almost as this like commons without a broader understanding of the organizations and the maintenance and the effort that is put into keeping it afloat. Like, it's not just like air that we happen to land upon. It's like it exists, and it exists for 35-ish years, and it's been this kind of like territory for mass empires. Another mind-boggling number, like trillion-dollar social media companies. Like, I think like the valuation of like, I don't know, the valuation of Facebook is over $1 trillion, which is insane. Like, that's not a number that makes sense for what it does, which is connecting people. I mean, it's like everything about it is really bizarre. But then you go back to the idea that like, then it is Facebook.com on the web, which is like organized by a bunch of, a lot of them very lovely, nerdy old guys, and some old non-guys. But
Is it, I saw a hand in the back too, just want to, yeah?
So like new online communities or? Yeah. I mean, I do love Mastodon. I feel like I'm, this is probably like my niche love of a social platform, but I do love like the opportunity to like create new social spaces in a web-style, interconnected Fediverse. And one that I've participated in for almost 10 years now. I pay my friend $4 a month on Patreon for cloud hosting. There are only about 100 of us. We all just hang out and talk there. And yes, it's my friend Darius Kazemi, and he has like extensive documentation about like how difficult it is to create something like that. So I would say it's not like the most I wouldn't say it's like introductory creating a social space online. Maybe it's more intermediate to advanced level, but even something like a group text, like you'll find people will just like screenshot conversations and save it for their own friends. Like people kind of have an intuitive sense of what they want to maintain or what they want to take with them. So if there is like a very beautiful moment, like say you just like announce that you're getting engaged to like a group chat of like 5 of your closest friends, maybe someone took a screenshot of that and saved it because it was lovely. And they're just like even these little tools that, even these terrible platforms, like one thing I didn't really get into is like AOL as it disintegrated, like it still provided enjoyment for me at that age where I was still kind of like hanging out in these places, even though I couldn't be my free self, my full self, I could have fun there. And even as imperfect as they are, you can still kind of use a Facebook group, understanding that like every hangout, in person or not, there are good things and bad things, and kind of figure out a way to tailor that experience for your own purposes as a group, as a friend group, as an organization. That's a lot of what we're always doing online as groups.
Yeah, what is like a more humane use of the internet looks like, and how can we create it? Do we own the internet or the internet owns us?
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to this policy space that I don't really have a strong handle on, in the sense of like that we should have rights over our user data, which we don't really have rights over, because it's not the same as like copyrights and that's where like AI is a little bit messy, because we're talking about AI as like the training data as like copyrighted if you're an author of it or something like that, as opposed to like, hey, in 2006 my grandmother passed away and I had all these friends who comforted me on Facebook, and I found out that was data that was scraped and turned into like some mishmash of trillion voices of people. Like that's like an exploitation. But I don't, as a non like legal thinker, I don't have quite the answer. But I think for the question of how to create humane spaces online, it's understanding what you're dealing with, which, like, is this a nonprofit like the web? Is it owned by a billionaire's horrible, they're all horrible, who's like benefiting from what you're doing there, and evaluating what, like, your own sense of risk and comfort and the potential of what these spaces offer to you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think like generative AI and the use of social media activity for generative AI is a betrayal, because nobody signed up for a Gmail account or a Facebook account or anything like that with the expectation that this is what would come of it. I mean, if you look at Google said pretty early on that they were AI based, but there wasn't like a broad conceptual understanding of what that could really be. And I about the time that I was writing this book, I remember this would have been about 2018 when I finished my manuscript. I just remember kind of like it finally dawned on me that like all this data that was accumulating, it was just going to be crunched up and used, as opposed to like this excess, like a snake shedding its skin, this is something ephemeral. It was actually like, no, every kind of human activity that you've experienced or been a participant in, this is all the goals that they have accumulated, and it is an exploitation, and I think sitting with that and remembering that, because there will be the generations to come who, the same way that someone was maybe a child when the web was launched, or when Facebook, someone who was born in 2004 is going to think Facebook's just always existed. Someone born in 2022 is just going to have always been alive when ChatGPT existed. So that feeling that the life you had before was just like grist for the mill, it was just like scrap metal to be used, that's something that we have to hang on to and remind people of, because that wasn't what anybody signed up for Facebook to be used that way. That absolutely wasn't.
And I think you bring in lurking. I think you expressed that really well. I think you one of the things that I love about the book and in your follow-up, which is a novel, is that you're not cynical about the use of the internet, and you're very factual, and also you present it as like we're all learning as we go. It's almost like, nobody knows how to be a mother, you just learn as you go, and nobody knows how to be a parent. It's like, there are things in life that you just learn as you go, and the internet is an example of like how we are now questioning, and it hasn't been that long, really, and then, but and how we can learn with our mistakes too, and that shows human integrity in the use of, in being a user too, of like, how can we now move on and learn from our mistakes and try to open up space for other things to exist within the tools that we're given.
Yeah, and I'm not, it's why I don't say anything like I hate the internet, because I actually think the internet is pretty incredible. I think like the internet as a technology, like the idea of networking computers, having global access to information and data, and how it came together, this, you know, when you talk about like how old interneting is, it's like 1969, the first message was sent from UCLA. So it's within many people's lifetimes. And there's something, when I do always love reading the technical histories of the beginning of personal computing, the beginning of the internet and packet switching and TCP, because like the quest was that exchange of information and exchange of knowledge. And the quest was, I would say, a rhetoric that Facebook, when it took off, kind of co-opted, but it's still quite true. And so that's that sense of like, if you have this global access to information, the kind of conversations you can have, that you could have a conversation, you can send a message to someone across the globe and they can receive it instantly. There is something incredibly powerful about that.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think as an immigrant, to speak from that perspective, is like my entire family's, you know, down south in South America and Brazil, and like the internet gives me access to them in ways that I wouldn't have had the chance to have access to them, to see my mother. Otherwise, I would forget her face, maybe. I don't know. Have you thought, unless I had a photograph of like how she's aging, and like I don't get to see her every year. I don't get to visit my parents, and like I think the internet is, since the beginning of my migration, it was like also from an immigrant perspective of like contact to where you come from, and creating that relationship. The internet is, I don't know what I would do without it. I don't know. I would be a different person, I think. And so would they. Yeah, I don't know. I think we have time for couple more questions if you got, yeah.
Can you talk about, do you think there's a relationship between the enclosure and commodification of the internet and the way those same strategies seem to be encroaching on our like, real lives? I'm thinking, you live around here, I'm thinking about the delivery robots and the Waymos. Sometimes it feels like the internet is like literally coming off the screen and into our daily lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually wrote something for the New York Review of Architecture about the Waymos and the delivery robots. And the Waymos, by the way, are Google. So, I mean, the same way that Google Search, YouTube, Waymos, all under Alphabet as a company. And I think there is, but I do think of that street level technology as this kind of like, it doesn't make sense as a technology that can scale, and I get into that in my New York Review of Architecture piece about like the limits to these products scaling, but it is incredibly visible as like a message of like being in your face if you're in a city. And even friends of mine that came to New York, that came here from New York, and it's one of the first things they'll comment on is like, what's up with these delivery robots, because they're just so visible. And it's like that same way of like having billboards up, just like putting that on a street level, a reminder of whether it's a startup or Silicon Valley as like a mindset. It's encroaching upon like, well, I would say like the real kind of connection here is that like a sidewalk as public space that taxpayers are funding, and these delivery robots can just like plow right through something that we all kind of share, or the Waymos being on public roads, their presence there, akin to like using the web as like, which is the internet equivalent of public space.
I feel like I think kind of the core problem of the attention economy has been that it's forcing all of us to compete against each other all the time. And when I go to a lot of these discussions about sort of the internet, media literacy, and these sort of things, I feel like we are often sort of just taking these ideas about creating this problem that we have, this hyper individual problem, and then we want to then say like, well, let's go touch grass, or let's try to be more friction, have more friction. But I think there is larger policy concerns that have to be addressed in these kinds of conversations. And so when we're talking about like the way data is managed, or we're talking about links that don't work on certain platforms, these are all problems of monopoly. They are all problems of monopoly. And one of the ways in which for us to fight against this is by whether it's voting power or any sort of like institutional power any of us might have, is to try to break up these monopolies. And there have been sort of people that have been seeking to do this somewhat recently, like Polina come up with the world. There's been other people that have been trying to have ideas that scale. For instance, like in Australia, they're making platforms pay news organizations for data that's written. And I feel like part of media literacy has to be a large economic discussion about how some of the policy choices that the people we vote for, the people in power, or the institutions that we're part of are going to actually fight against these monopolistic forces that are exerting control over all of our lives and seeking rent under consensus reality. So what are some of these like institutional solutions that you feel like might be good ideas?
An institutional solution off the top of my head is in Europe. They are, I don't know the exact players, but there are attempts in Europe to kind of create PBS style, public broadcasting, BBC style alternatives to various corporate tech, including Microsoft Office, Google applications. That's something that I don't know where they're at. It's a pretty recent development, but that's like an example of where the kind of utopian thinking, if we're thinking big about like what could be a potential alternative, I would say, yeah, we want like a PBS for the internet. We want these kind of like more public, again, not-for-profit, non-commercial, decentralized projects that could be communication tools. The internet itself was developed through, government funding. It was privatized in the 90s, and elements of it were privatized in the 90s. But I think some of my hesitation to bring that up in this talk is because in 2016, it felt like things would happen. It really did, because you had the strange bedfellows of like various conservatives and leftists together saying we need to abolish Facebook and things like that just Amazon has got to go, and obviously having very different interests with what sounded like an aligned position. And ultimately, these companies are so big that they're basically buying up every single congressman you can think of. I mean, OpenAI just like, as soon as ChatGPT launched, you had Sam Altman in Washington charming everybody apparently because they want the campaign donations. I hear you with like that this is a monopoly issue and it's an issue of scale and it has to be addressed with policy. I'm right now not optimistic that those policy solutions will come and any soon-ish. I mean, hopefully at some point, hopefully in 10 years, we will have something to point to. But for now, what I can do is direct people to more the harm reduction model of how to use the internet for your own purposes.
It's like have like an internet custodian of like guide and like the librarian you mentioned, like having a guide to navigate this very like thin veil between what's real and what's not real, and benefit of corporations only. Yeah, it's like, so I one of the things like I feel I read recently that only 20% of teenagers in America now are interested in reading books. That's a very sad, low percentage, and that lowered since the pandemic. We do have a lot of young people coming here through the library, which gives me hope. It's like,
Well, I mean, the thing is, what is a book that the internet isn't? A book, if we're talking about books that people love, I mean, you're sitting with someone else's interiority. It's like a real beautiful expression of receiving someone's interiority, receiving information that you aren't alone with various thoughts, or getting a perspective that you wouldn't hear otherwise. And that interest in being with someone as a reader, that interest in writing books and being received that way, I don't think it's going away so much as like people have forgotten what a book even is in that way of.
and often I find people as from like just running the library, like they lack the ability to search on their own. Like I'm kind of teaching a lot of kids how to use the index, which is really bizarre that I get to let you go back to like index search and like familiarize yourself with bibliographies and like footnotes, and like the footnote is like the link we're talking about. It's like that gives you an extra information, so this can take you somewhere else. But there is a lack of like ability to even really thinking those terms. And that's something, I don't know. I don't know the answer. It's just something I observe. And yeah.
I mean, maybe it means like more mentorship of like old internet people like me, taking some like 14-year-olds under their wing.
More conversations like this, yes. And maybe our teenagers could be, there's like a class to be initiated in terms of like, this maybe could be like part of the curriculum of what we teach our children to adapt to be critical thinkers of the internet, to also, figure it out what's real, what's not. I know there's some countries now having policies where they are teaching like critical using the internet to identify what's fake and what's real. I think that's really important moving forward, to know what is that we are receiving and opening up the portals. What does that portal look like? It could be, I don't know, the devil in there, and could be an angel. But yes, what else we have? Like, I think I saw a hand in the back, but I could be wrong. I see a lot of shadow. There's a lot of light.
One more question.
Yeah,
Just
maybe
one more.
Two more.
Oh,
We can do two more, and then we'll do some book signings. Just sort of, we'll open up. Like, you don't have to leave the library, but we have a few minutes. We have books in the bookstore. Joanne has some books here too, so you're welcome to stick around for a little bit and chat just amongst ourselves. But yeah, question in the back.
What do you mean, lack of courage for what? fulfill like a librarian for Facebook or something. I mean, actually, I will say that like Google in its early days was like made these like high profile librarian hires to kind of brand itself as this like true information center. So like in like 2004 through 2008, like they kept like hiring librarians at Google. And a librarian I know, Jessamine West, she's written about it extensively, that like she would go to conferences full of librarians, and Google would have this very present, they'd be very, very present and visible. And this was just around the time that like Google was scanning all these books. And it just like was this kind of gesture toward it being like it was one of many gestures that Google presented, including Google Art and Culture, where they were like hiring curators and doing interior street view panoramas of museums and putting artworks in Google. As like Google, when it first launched, it was not AI. That was not like the messaging. The messaging was information of all sorts, just data, not data as we understand it as like user data, but data as in like, here's a catalog of every painting you could possibly see in MoMA, something like that. So they did hire librarians. And even those early companies like Yahoo did, like that, there was just like taxonomy as an understanding of what the internet is, which is documents and information. So I think it's just like, it's a long history, and I would really recommend for this question to seek out Jessamine West's writing, because she's very, very brilliant thinker and addresses that specifically in her work.
One more? Jude?
Someone mentioning the attention economy reminded me of, I have a friend who's like a really brilliant media theorist, but is now has an ad agency. And he told me the trend that is coming with, I guess, the dying of social media and the attention economy that's connected to that is something called the intention economy, is what they're calling it. Have you come across that in your research? Because it kind of feels also relevant to the fact we're in a surrealist group. But he says it has to do with how marketeers are like interested in, with these new chatbots and stuff, to actually like harness intention rather than attention. Like they're going into our unconscious now. Like that's the plan.
Well,
And they're calling it
the intention economy. Okay. I'm sure that book is going to sell way more copies than Lurking. I mean, I get what they're talking about, which is like these chatbots are meant to like occupy you, and I think like chatbots as like a product of AI. What troubles me is like overwhelming a person and just like that full engagement, but it's still like a shallow reflection. I mean, it's just like, is it, staring at the lake, like echo, it's just like, and it's there are always going to be those people who fall in love with their chatbots, just like there are people who fell in love with cars or fell in love with a lot of weird things. And the internet is definitely going to amplify 5 weirdos who do behave this way. But I think a lot of us just like, what I said before about like reward comes when you express effort. It's that tension and a raising of stakes and the excitement and curiosity as like a quest, as opposed to just like things delivered to you, that ultimately is like what humans throughout history have been have called desire, as like a product of like things you have to somehow put effort toward. It doesn't just, it's not, things you desire are not fed to you. That's like the opposite of what desire is.
Yeah, it's like you
Yeah,
they are. To quote you in Lurking, you call the internet a familiar but mysterious companion. It is seductive, idiosyncratic, unreliable, and contradictory. while it is also at your service and by your side. But when morphized, diverse and divergent communities of users are reduced to a single identity. So it's speaking to like the mysterious companion of the internet, right? We're still, it is like everything. It's you don't know until you're using it, and you don't know until you're there and like trying to figure out how it works and how it can how we can work with the tool as a way to understand our space within it. And we all need it. I don't know if there's anyone in the room here who doesn't use the internet. Please raise your hand, because I would love to know who you are. It's like how you're managing it. I was talking to someone the other day. I was out getting like a telephone to have it in the house, and you can't even get a landline anymore, unless you have a business. So it's like, can a family be a business? And then they're gonna like start to use the phones, show my child. But it's how do we go back in terms of like using these tools that are unreliable, understand that they are unreliable, but have access to it in general because even as a librarian, like the internet helps me do some of the searching and the understanding of even the content that I have here. But I can only rely so much on the internet to give me that information, and then the rest I have to investigate. But having that motivation is what's lacking right now, I think, in a lot, especially young users, and maybe not so young. But I'm observing from my access to like youth in this library. It's like how they are perceiving information in between what they use in books and what they are searching online. And I know searching online is just, it's become, it is the norm, but we don't have internet in this library, just so you guys know. As a library, we have pride in not giving people access to the internet, and there's no cell reception here that's really great. So we have one computer that works, but it's only used to search the archives of its own that we have here. I let people use the computer to, like, if they're interested in a section, a category, they can use the computer, but there's a sense of freedom in that, and people enjoy it. At first, they're like taken aback, like, you don't have internet? I'm like, no, but like, we have the library, and
You have all this information right here.
yeah. And maybe it's limited too, because it's conditioned to a time and place and donations and the collection of a few people, and then also we're limited to what was printed during the time that it was collected. But it's here. It's a type of internet. It's just, yeah, a physical. Yeah, I think I appreciate your language in lurking so much. Like, I feel like we can all learn from this, and I would love for you to continue to teach how we use this and how we perceive it. And I think that I'm looking forward to read what you have to write about next.
Dama, that's so kind
You're a
of you.
great
And thank
thinker.
you
Yes.
for being such
Yes.
an incredible moderator and
thank
having
you.
this, like, coming with this curiosity and setting the tone for this discussion. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Please stick around, and yes.